Tucker Carlson claims that white Americans are discriminated against more than blacks have ever been discriminated against in American history, happening in 2026. Let's see how you break this down. Now, before we get into the details, let's just get you caught up in what's going on in this clip for you to understand what's going on real quick.
In this interview, Stephen A. Smith challenges Tucker Carlson to explain what his America First vision actually means for a diverse country. Tucker sounds almost progressive when he attacks the Iran war, criticizes Israel's influence, and talks about economic exploitation. But when Stephen A. presses him on a much more specific question, how America should repair the unfair advantage white Americans gained over black Americans through slavery, Jim Crow, and generations of unequal access to wealth and power, Tucker refuses to answer it. Instead, he deflects to race-neutral principles and broader economic problems. That refusal is what I want you to listen for.
Listen, I can't deny what you're saying, but the flip side to it is that you're simplifying it. One would easily argue, when people have heard you talk in the past, whether it's about immigration, whether it's about race, it's about demographics in this country or whatever. Listen, I can't deny what you're saying, but the flip side to it is that you're simplifying it. One would easily argue, when people have heard you talk in the past, whether it's about immigration, whether it's about race, it's about demographics in this country or whatever, they may not share your point of view. A matter of fact, some people may be put off by some of the things they may have that have been put out there about you. But again, we don't know how accurate it is. I guess what I'm asking you is, when you think about this country, what's your ideal of a perfect America? Because a lot of times, I got to tell you, I'm not going to say you, because I haven't seen much of you, even though I used to try to watch you on Fox News a lot more than I see you right now on YouTube and stuff like that. I'm just a busy guy talking. What can I say? But I when people talk about you, they feel like, listen, nationalist point of view, America first, last, and only, for the most part, until the latest stuff with Israel has come about. And there's a lot of folks demographically in this country that wonder whether or not you vibe and your thinking, your vision for this country vibes with what they would like for this country. Talk about that for a second here.
I would say nationalist, America first. I mean, there's literally no other acceptable way to run a country. So if I've got kids and I'm like, I like the neighbor's kids more than my own, I'm a bad father, okay? So the only justifiable position in a democracy is put the country first. Like, what's the point? Who owns the country? Well, its citizens own the country. Therefore, this whole enterprise, this whole thing is being done on their behalf. So if I...
All right, so the first thing he says is the only way to run a country is America first. And so I want to challenge just that real quick. Then we can get right back to the video.
Tucker's claim, America first is the only acceptable way to govern, and putting another country ahead of America is treason. Language model verdict. Disagree as an absolute rule. Governments owe duties to their citizens, but those duties remain limited by law, human rights, and moral obligations beyond the nation.
So basically what we're saying here is that Tucker is saying the highest duty of a country is to put its citizens first. I would disagree with that. It should be morality first, and then your citizens second, because morality dictates what you do to others outside of your country. Otherwise, you could justify doing anything to any country, as long as it benefit your country. And so I don't agree with what Tucker's saying. And the reason I'm bringing this up is because later when he actually talks about blacks getting reparations and even in the playing field, you'll start to see that same type of America first patriotic view and how it's limited when you actually start to ask him to do things for the central people in this country, blacks and other groups who've been here since the beginning. So let's continue.
I don't put my own country first or put another country first. By definition, I'm committing treason, which they are. So it's not about Israel. It can't. Once again, it could be Uruguay. It doesn't matter. You have to protect your people. Nobody disagrees with that, by the way. As for the race stuff, there has been this concerted effort to convince non-whites that whites are the problem. Whites are bad. Whiteness is bad. We hate whites. And to foment hatred between the races. Now, why have they tried to do that? Why would you ever do that? Which they have definitely done.
So I want to stop here real quick. I want you to understand what Tucker's saying about race hatred. So just check this out.
Tucker's claim. Powerful institutions have spent decades teaching non-white Americans that whites are bad, deliberately creating racial hatred. Language model verdict. Not established. Criticism of racial inequality or concentrated power is not the same as hatred of white people, and a claim this broad requires direct evidence of coordinated intent and widespread effect.
Yeah, so he's just freely saying that for the last, 50 years or so, it's been a concerted effort to hate white people. That is not true. The majority of blacks and African Americans in this country do not hate white people. Do you understand what the word hate means? Let's look at the definition. If you were to hate somebody in Nazi Germany, if they said they hate the Jews, they're willing to actually kill them, which we do not accept and do not agree with. If you look at some whites in the South who said they hate blacks and treat them less than human, they enslaved them. They literally they segregated them from their society. They hung them on trees. They put them in prison for 100 years for basic crimes. That is hate. For Tucker Carlson to use the word hate, he would have to show us equivalent behavior that has been done to whites at scale. Has African Americans put whites in jail for 40 to 50 years? We don't even have the power. We don't have the institutional power. Have we intentionally locked them out of jobs? We don't control the majority of jobs, so we couldn't even execute on that level of power. Have we hung them on trees? We have not done that, and we're not even in a position to do that to them in this country. So the word hate that he's using in this definition does not even vibe with reality, because if you want to look at hate, you have to look at what hateful things are. Killing kids in Gaza and not caring is hateful. Have blacks killed lots of whites in America at scale? No, we have not. Do we even have the power to execute things that are this level of hate? No, we have not. So how can he create a definition of hate simply because African Americans are identifying certain group of elitist white European people who are controlling society in a way that doesn't benefit the rest of us? And just for criticizing them and identifying them as European or white supremacists, he considers that hate, when in actuality, those elitists are using the basis of their race to denigrate other races and using white middle class people as the proxy, the middle ground person. It's like you being an elite system and you need people to manage the masses. So you give a lot of white European people middle class jobs, management roles, and say, you manage this labor. That's what the elite are doing. And we're bringing that to their attention. And instead of acknowledging that we're criticizing the power structure who's controlled by mainly European white men, instead of acknowledging that that is our goal, he said, no, you hate us, but you haven't proven it. Our definition of hate is more realistic. You're killing people. You're willing to lock people up and give them 50 years, 30 years for basic crimes that other white men commit, and they don't get nowhere near that time. That should rise to the level of hate. And I don't agree with Tucker. You can't give any examples like that. So I don't think you get to use the word hate. It's not justified.
Kind of scale for 60 years. Well, because when you're busy hating your neighbor on the basis of his race, they're busy looting your country, which they have done. So it's a diversion tactic. And the truth is, if you say what I just said to the majority of Americans of any color, they're like, well, of course that's right. What's the purpose of having a government if it's not there to help you? Then why do we have it? It's to help Bibi? What are you even talking about? Of course you're a nationalist. Of course you're an America first and only. Doesn't mean you hate other countries. I'm not for bombing other countries most of the time, unless they're bombing us. So I'm not against other countries. And by the way, I've been to almost every country on the planet and I like them all. So it's not that. It's why do you have a government? It's to look out for you and your interests. That's why you pay taxes. This whole conversation is bonkers, but the race stuff is the most upsetting. And what you see when you really drill down, because it divides people permanently. The Democratic Party has spent 60 years telling non-white voters that whites are the problem and that whites hate them because they're not white. That's a freaking lie, dude. That's a lie.
Okay, but what?
He said the Democratic Party spent the last 60 years hating white people. Check this out.
Tucker's claim: for 60 years, the Democratic Party has told non-white voters that white people are the problem and hate them. Language model verdict: disagree. That description reduces a broad and changing history of civil rights policy, electoral strategy, and racial rhetoric to one motive the historical record does not establish.
So let's look at this objectively. And let's look at this common sense. Do you believe the Democratic Party has been promoting white hate for the last 60 years? That's how Tucker's interpretation of this is. But let's look at the actual Democratic Party. The Democratic Party is made up of a large swath of America. They have millions of white people who are Democratic. They have millions of blacks who are Democratic. They have even probably millions of others that falls under Hispanic and Asian who are Democratic. If you believe that they can openly hate white people in the Democratic Party, do you think that a significant portion of white people will vote for the Democratic Party? I'm not here to defend the Democratic Party. I'm here to defend the fact is this. You got to understand the mechanism of the Democratic Party. The reason the Democratic Party is able to criticize white men or power structures is because the Democratic Party has an incentive to appeal to more than just white people. It has an incentive to appeal to blacks, Mexicans, and Hispanics. And our actual beef with the dominant society is not white people. It is people who dominate society, the majority. And the majority of people in society that control the majority of the wealth and the majority of institutional power are white European people because they're the majority of the population. There's over 150 million European white people in America. And so that means that if there's elite people in the Senate, controlling the corporations, owning the banks, owning the land, controlling the voting power, that we're going to criticize things that they're doing if we don't feel like they're fairly distributing power, wealth, and prosperity. And Tucker's taking that criticism that we're consistently doing and saying, no, it's because you hate white people. And he's saying because you identify them as white and as the people, as the culprit. And remember, when we're saying these things, we're not talking about all white people. We're talking about them on a civilizational level. What have your civilization done? Well, let's look at it. In the last 100 years, the dominant European civilization, that is America, has enslaved blacks. Okay, that is the reality. They have invaded over 40 countries all over the world after World War II. They have overthrown governments. They have bummed countries almost all over the Middle East and in Latin America. They're backing other tyrannical governments. They're throwing, executing coups against their enemies. And so as a non-white person who's not racially part of their tribal civilization, I cannot be blind to what they're doing. And when I criticize it, Tucker's saying you're criticizing white people. No, we're criticizing elite white people who are doing things that even honest white people know that's immoral. And he's seeing that as hate. And that's the problem I have with Tucker Carlson. It's like, I agree with him about Israel. I agree with him about being America first. But when they ask him fundamental questions about, hey, African Americans been in this country since the inception. Are you willing to help rectify the fact that we're 150 years economically and wealth behind you guys? Are you willing to do anything to even the playing field? Oh, we can't do that because we believe in democratic principles. And in democratic principles, we can't make any corrections based on race. So therefore, we can't do anything. You just have to operate off the fair merit-based capitalistic game you live in today, which means that if I already have a 150-year lead, even if we keep everything as it is now, you will never catch up. Because everything that we do to climb the ladder, you have a 150-year head start. So every inch we move up, you move up with a 150-year head start. We'll never catch up. We'll always be a minority. We'll always be a second class. We'll never be more power to you. And he wants to keep it that way because in his eyes, hey, that bad stuff we did back in the day, we don't do that anymore. And we have new democratic principles where people are created equally. And if we were to reshuffle the deck based on race, that will betray the new ideals that we had that stopped us from being racist. Therefore, too bad. You have to figure out a way to make up for 150 years, even though the way we got that lead is something you can never make up with morally, because you can never create the same amount of wealth that 300 years of free labor can create. So as a group, right? Yes, we're still American, but as a group, we could never make up for that. And he knows that. He's intelligent. So he plays this game because it's a game that locks us into our place. He doesn't have to provide a solution to this problem. He could just always argue, I believe in universal principles. Therefore, we cannot give African Americans wealth and other advantages for they can catch up as a group because it goes against our new principles. It's just a game. And that's why, even though Tucker is saying things that I do respect when it comes to Israel and talking about not being in war with Iran, when it comes to really dealing with the original sin of America that keeps us from truly growing and truly healing, he's like every other conservative European. He's not going to admit the fact is wrong was done and it needs rectification. He just cannot do it because it requires him to give up way too much.
What about,
And a lot
what
of
about
black
from an
people believe it.
but Tucker, as a black
Yeah.
man, what about from an historical perspective, looking at slavery, looking at Jim Crow laws, looking at the iniquitous acts of a white populace that existed in this country, and simply acknowledging, look, that happened, that existed, and we could never come close to letting something like that happen again, policy or otherwise. What's wrong with doing that?
Well, it is
that
happening
divisive?
again.
No. What I mean is it
it is
divisive?
happening
Is
again.
is
it
what
divisive?
happening?
Yeah. Jim Crow is happening again at a larger scale.
Yes, it
We
is.
have more racial quotas now against whites than we ever had against blacks in the South.
And see, these are the things that are crazy. He said we have more racial quotas than we have now for whites than you ever had in the South. Do you understand how utterly ridiculous that really is?
Tucker's claim, modern racial quotas against white people are more extensive than Jim Crow was against black people. Language model verdict, disagree. Jim Crow was a state-enforced caste system spanning voting, education, housing, employment, public life, and violence. Modern, race-conscious policies may be disputed, but they are not comparable in scale or structure.
He really believes what he just said. Like, he's talking about DEI policies, which, if we look up the numbers, there's a very small amount of people that truly benefited from those policies. He's saying that there's more discriminatory policies in 2026 for white men than there has ever been for the entire history of the African American in this country. He's talking about DEI policies when you already are applying for a job. Do you understand that they used to discriminate to blacks by arresting them and giving them years in prison? Killing them openly and men getting away from it? The whole country had laws on the book that specifically identified them as, if you're black, you're 3/4 a citizen.
And in federal contracting, in college admissions, in hiring, in private companies and public companies, it's like, how about the government treats everybody the same? That's the lesson of the civil rights movement. Let's treat everyone the same.
Stay right there. What if I said to you, Tucker, you got a 50-yard head start? And guess what? You've been operating at a 50-yard head start for a lengthy period of time. And in order to equal the playing field, I've got to get a head start to be able to catch up to you. Because essentially, that's what you have a black populace or a minority populace in this country articulating to some degree anyway. I understand your point.
I have the numbers on that. So
two wrongs don't make a right.
Right. Okay.
I'm saying two wrongs don't make a right. I get that part. But if you're talking about, see, there's a lot of folks within this country that are of that mindset. And I respectfully disagree. But the key word is respectfully, because I understand where you're coming from. I'm just simply saying, if you've been operating as a society, as a community, with a head start for a lengthy period of time, how is the playing field ever supposed to be equaled if we were never given a come up? I mean, at some point in time, that premise has to be addressed, does it not?
Right. I mean, look, I would say, I think it's really important to articulate why racial discrimination is bad. And because it's bad, it's always bad, no matter who commits it, period.
Okay.
Think about what he's saying. First of all, he's telling African Americans that we're the one got to articulate how racial discrimination is bad when we're the one that experienced it. It's funny, now he's trying to lecture us about racial discrimination now that we're telling him that we need to make up for the inequities that racial discrimination that was done by whites to blacks today in 2026. We're not asking you to discriminate against white men. We're asking you to take money and restore a community that's been intentionally destroyed by the systematic policies of the U.S. government for over 150 years. So by doing that, we're not targeting white men, the entire country, or white people, because there's Mexicans and Hispanics and Indians and Asian people who live here too. So when they restore that for us, the original inhabitants of the country, they're not only targeting white people, they're targeting us, the hurt party. In a civil case, if you're involved in an oil spill and your house gets destroyed and your house gets damaged, and then later when you sue the government and say, hey, my house has been destroyed because of things that your government did with the oil, you turn around and say, well, we can't pay you because other people's house was destroyed who came years later to the country and they kind of secondhand were damaged because they lived in the community that was destroyed, but they wasn't there when it actually got destroyed. They just had to live in a lesser community. Well, since those people who lived in that lesser community ain't going to get paid as well, we can't make up for the fact that we originally destroyed your community. That's what he's doing. It's a big giant game where, hey, we can't pay you because we can't pay everybody, and that wouldn't be fair, even though we're the original group here when the actual event happened. It's a giant game because if they admit that they were wronged in this area, almost all of the European advantage they have when it comes to performance, when it comes to starting companies, when it comes to education, when it comes to success, when it comes to being the middle class, has come from the fact that they have a giant head start. And if you give up that advantage, there's no guarantee that white people will continue to be the leaders of this country. And that's the reality. That's why this is a non-starter. This is something that white European society will not consider. It's civilizational restructuring at that point, and they're not going to give up their power. Power never gives up. Their power is only taken. So I want you to consider this when I ask the language model.
Tucker's claim: because racial discrimination is always wrong, equal treatment is the complete answer to Stephen's catch-up question. Language model verdict: no. Equal rules can prevent new discrimination, but they do not by themselves repair wealth, property, inheritance, and institutional advantages accumulated under earlier unequal rules.
So this was the answer the language model came up with when they looked up all of his metadata, all the history, all the experts, and it's clear what Tucker's saying is not realistic and it's not reality.
Period. Mm-hmm. It's inherently bad to judge people and to punish people on the basis of their skin color. Do you agree with that?
I agree with that. I agree with that.
Oh, you do agree with
what
that?
I'm saying.
Okay, then you
I
can't
totally agree.
Okay, well, then we're done.
I'm not I'm not disagreeing. I'm simply pointing out that, again, if the objective is to have a fair and equitable society for all, how is that supposed to be accomplished if folks are operating from behind the eight ball because of years of laws and policies and things that subjugated a community in this country? How is that supposed to ever happen?
I think that people whose ancestors were dragged here against their will in slavery are at a disadvantage. However, I think it's a lot more complicated than you're saying. I think that does hurt people generationally. Clearly it does. However, the idea that it's all whites are racist, then you tell me why whites, and you can check the Department of Labor stats on this if you want, they're on the internet. Whites are like, I don't know, fifth or sixth.
First of all, nobody ever said all whites are racist. You see how he tried to create a paradigm of logic that doesn't follow? We never said that. We just said that society has disproportionately hurt the black community and we want you to repair it so we can have a fair chance to compete in capitalism in society. And he said, well, if we do that, then we'll be acknowledging that we're agreeing with blacks saying all whites are racist. Who said that? Nobody. He threw that in there in order to make our logic chain to justify reparations illogical. Nobody said that. An average black person on the street don't believe all white people are racist. We don't even believe 30% of white people in America are racist.
Sixth for income in the United States. So white people are not the rich people. Nigerians, your average Nigerian in the United States makes more than your average white. So tell me if there's this like system. So I guess what I'm also saying is that like this country has become so genuinely diverse. Like when I was a kid, it was black people, white people, some Hispanics, very few Asians, and really no one else. And the black people, their families have been here as long as mine, hundreds of years. I mean, their families were dragged here in colonial times, some of them. So that was a different picture than what we're looking at now. Now we're going to get to a place by the time, in a couple more decades, where the majority of black people in the United States are not the descendant of American slaves. So then it's like, so do we owe affirmative action to an Eritrean when he arrives on a visa program? I don't think so. So like this whole thing is nuts, actually. So the only solution is to say slavery is always wrong. discrimination on the basis of race is always wrong. And so let's stop doing it because it's wrong. It'd be like saying, and they do say it, well, a lot of people who survived the Nazi genocide moved to Israel and their grandchildren, have a right to be upset about that. Okay, got it. But those same people are committing genocide. So it was wrong when it happened to their grandparents. It's wrong when they're doing it because it's just wrong.
Here's the problem. First, I want to deal with his Nigerian example, which is ridiculous. He's basically trying to say, oh, white people are like six in earnings in the United States. That's a lie, first of all. So let's ask the language model and see what they come up with, because I want to show you why that's a lie, and I'll tell you afterward.
Tucker's claim, Nigerian immigrant income and white income rankings, show that race is too complicated for a lineage-specific repair argument. Language model verdict: disagree. Nigerian immigrants are not the same population as descendants of American slavery, and current income is not the same as accumulated wealth, inheritance, ownership, or political power.
Basically, what that means is this. Look, Nigerians are less than 1% of the population of America. Second of all, the Nigerians who come to this country are not just any everyday Nigerian. So the reason that they have a high income is because in order to come to America, on average, it costs $10,000, which means that you either you're really smart and have a high IQ, you're studying math, science, or something that the country needs, or your family already have money in Nigeria. So just like Asians who come to this country, the small proportion of Nigerians who come to this country are already some of their most talented. Out of every population in the world, about maybe 5 to 10% of them have engineering level talent. That means that they're born with neuroplasticity in their brain, where they have the capacity to do science, math, medical, things of that nature. Every population in the world has these groups of people. So think about it. If a group of person is going to migrate to a country where it costs a lot of money, come live in another country, and give an incentive for this country to allow them to come here, what group of people are going to come here? They're smartest, they're brightest. And that's the people that America is going to intentionally let come in, especially if they're coming from Africa, especially if they're coming from China. We're not going to just let some poor Chinese person comes in who can't speak the language, who's not educated. We give educational visas and work visas to people who fill talent roles for America. So when you get out of 200 million Nigerians, a small percentage of whom they get in is going to be the smartest ones. And so he's taking the smartest Nigerians, less than 1% population of the United States, and saying, look, Nigerians are very successful. There's no systemic racism. The reason that African Americans are failing at scale, 44 million of them, is because they're not able to be like the 1% of Nigerians who have high IQs. Well, we have plenty of engineers in the Black community who have high performance, but they're only a small percent of any given population. So you cannot take the most talented, what they call the talented 10th, of a population and say, hey, why can't you be like the engineers? Well, I could ask you all of the white people in the Rust Belt states, why can't you be like Elon Musk? Why can't you be like Steve Jobs? They're less than 1% of your population. Why can't you be like Mark Zuckerberg? Why can't you be like Jeff Bezos? Because the majority of regular people are not engineering level talent. You're going to always have outlier groups. Secondly, he tried to claim that basically white Americans are essentially the sixth earning group in America. That's not true, because Nigerians don't represent Black Americans. And when I'm saying, because they're less than 0.0000% of the population, to see how African Americans are doing, you have to look at the average African American out of the 44 million and how they're doing. And economically, they have no wealth at all. They own less than 1% of the wealth in America. And when it comes to racial groups, he's talking about income. You cannot put Nigerians at the top of the income scale when they're not the distinct groups of America. You got to look at the largest group that represent America. There's 50 million Hispanics, there's 44 million Blacks, and then there's over 150 million whites. Those are the top proportionally large groups in America. Who has the highest income out of those three groups? White people. Then maybe Hispanics, and then Blacks. Or it could interchange between Black and Hispanics. So he actually lied because he took two outlier groups, less than 1% of Nigerians, a very distinct group that doesn't represent African Americans, and put them at the top to lower where white people stand, when that's not true. If you look at the wealth, institutional power, business ownership, political power, white people, European white people, and anybody associated with that group are by far the most dominant group in America by all metrics. So what he's saying is he's playing with numbers to say things that are false. And if you look at everything else he said after that, that follows, it shows that he's playing a giant game. That's why I told you Tucker Carlson is America first when he's talking about Israel. He's America first when he's talking about no new wars. But when you get domestically and start saying, hey, we need to fix the original sin of America, he's unwilling to do it.
Universal principles that if we don't defend, we will wind up in the world that we left when we started this country, which is the powerful people get to do whatever they want and everyone else has to just deal with it. And I don't want to live in that country.
I agree with you when you say there's universal principles that we should just uphold, and that obviously, there are things that are iniquitous acts that we should absolutely speak against, no matter who it's for or against. Absolutely, I'm totally with you.
Exactly.
The flip side to it, the flip side to it, however, is that one could easily also argue that lets off the hook those who have benefited and have positioned themselves to be in positions of power and influence where they can subjugate a vast majority of folks in our society, as we've witnessed people doing for decades upon decades. You can make the argument that they're already at an advantage and they're getting left off the hook by doing exactly what Tucker Carlson suggests, because what you want to do is start with a clean slate and just erase all that has happened. I don't mean literally erase it from the mind's eye. I'm just talking about starting from scratch and going forward, when we can never start from scratch going forward.
Exactly. And that's the point. He wants a clean slate where we say, hey, we operate off universal principles now. And the reality is that just lets all the power off the hook. The people who already have the 150-year head start, white people, right? We'll never catch up. You can't catch up to somebody with a 150-year head start because they're not just standing still. Every new technology, every new innovation, every new opportunity, they're using their capital, influence, and power to take advantage of it. So even if we are start to improve our cultural practices and have, nuclear families and all of that stuff, you still would never catch up. You cannot give somebody a 150-year head start with wealth, power, and control in the society and then have exponential technology like AI come out that can accelerate and widen the gap and think that a group can catch up only by being perfect. Even with perfect execution, you will never catch up. And he wants to lock that in by never fixing those flaws. Basically, what he's asking African Americans to do is abide by the law, play by the rules, cannot do anything to correct the wrongs that they've done, and compete in this game he called fair, when in actuality, from a group perspective, from race to race perspective, it's rigged from the original sin of you having disproportionate power, 150 years of wealth inequality. And it's locked in structurally. Like once you own money, once you already have capital, once you're already in power, every new technology requires investment in money. If they control the majority of the wealth, like the majority of whites do today, that means they're going to have the money to invest in those technologies. They're going to have the money to profit from those technologies. And you have to sit back and watch because you do not have the capital. And that's basically what he's asking us to do, to be a permanent minority, a permanent underclass, permanently under white people. That's essentially what his solution is. Whether he recognizes it, whether it's not his intention or not, by not correcting the problem, that's what he's basically condemning African Americans to, that you're going to always be a minority to us. You're going to always be under us. You're never going to be able to rival us in power, and we expect you to accept it. So let's look at what the language model opinion of this is, not mine.
Tucker's position. Equal rules now are sufficient despite advantages accumulated under the old system. Language model verdict. Agree with Stephen's objection. Ending discriminatory rules does not erase wealth, property, networks, inheritance, and influence already produced by them. The unresolved question is what form of repair should follow.
And that's the fundamental problem with all this, really, when you really get to it.
Carlson?
The fundamental problem overall is that one of the biggest arguments they make against giving reparations in this country is the fact that they think it's impractical. And in many ways it is, until you understand. And they say it's too complex. It's too hard to do. It's too of a complex issue. Yet they have 750 bases all around the world. They're literally trying to run the world. They invaded over 40 countries in the world since World War II. They're holding off Russia, a superpower. They're trying to fight against China as a superpower. They're trying to overthrow Iran. They're trying to take over Venezuela. They're trying to take over Cuba. They're trying to absorb Greenland and Canada. They're trying to do all that, put Mexico in its place. They basically think they can project power all over the world. The most complex thing you can ever do. And they're doing it, and they've been doing it for 80 years. But they're saying it's just too complex to make up for the wrongs that they did 44 million people. Yet you're trying to subjugate over 4 billion people. And you're actively doing it with your military bases. You're actively doing it with your economic coups. You're actively doing it when you're lunging bombs into Iran right now, today. But it's too complicated to make sure that the original inhabitants of this country that you've wronged, the original sin that makes every country in the world look down on America, you can't even approach trying to correct that by simply closing the gap economically. It's too complex, but you can run a global empire where you subjugate billions of people to your rule, but you can't handle doing what's right for 44 million blacks who are your partners in this country called America. Ridiculous. Ridiculous.